the Weekly Show with David J. Maloney.
This week, David chats with investigative journalist Scott Johnson.
And now, here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome, everyone, to the Weekly Show. I'm your host, David J. Maloney. On tonight's show, we've got a really special guest. His investigative reporting has broke some of the biggest stories on the Gulf Coast in the past 2 years. And with the drop of his most recent pieces, Crash Call Collect and Old Shell Game, he has once again brought an important issue to the public's attention. Back after the break to chat about it all is Lagniappe reporter Scott Johnson. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Our featured guest tonight is an investigative journalist who has broke some of the biggest local stories on the Gulf Coast over the past 2 years. He was the first in the nation to cover what was boiling over in the IVF cases in Mobile County that led to national ramifications, and his new pieces, Crash Call Collect and Old Shell Game, have broken and followed up on a huge story alleging racketeering and unethical case running by certain law firms in and out of the state of Alabama. Here to chat about it all is Lagniappe journalist Scott Johnson. Scott, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, David.
So, Scott, you've been part of some really fascinating stories in the last 2 years as an investigative journalist, which I want to discuss. But first, I'd like to learn a little bit about you and how you got into this line of work. Let's roll the years back a little bit. What was the linear trajectory to get you here? Or did you kind of happy accident into this part of your career?
Yeah, definitely a happy accident. I was actually on a career path towards clergy. I went to ministry school for several years, and then I actually jumped into the journalism world while in ministry school. So I got a job at a local newspaper, and from there I just got sucked in. So it's a never-ending hole of things you can poke around in, and so it was up on Marion County, Alabama, in rural Northwest Alabama, and moved down here in October 2021 to join the Lagniappe team.
Interesting, because if you were looking at a pastoral type of career on one hand, which is where you're essentially somebody who has to be there for somebody all the time, or not all the time, but it takes a certain disposition.
So I think the dedication to truth telling, I think, is a big one, where my goal is the truth. My goal, even if I have to confront and ask questions, and to be open-minded in the fact that even when I approach a story, being open to letting the truth, lead out, not trying to put my hand onto it or trying to manipulate it, but to be dedicated to the truth and let it lead and create what the story actually is. And the best thing I can do is just to give both sides, and that's my goal, is give place to this person has an opinion and they have a claim. It's just like the legal system, like you're wrapped in every day. I want to present the case from both sides. And then the pastor side, I mean, it's the empathy and understanding that I was, just those practices to understand people, meet people where they're at, and also preserve the sources that I'm talking to. I mean, people are being, that they are injured people, just like your clients are really injured people. And especially when I'm having to consider that these, if I put their name into the paper, they can be, retaliated against, and it affects their lives. So I do a lot of pastoral things to the sources I'm working with, reassuring and trying to build trust, especially because a lot of them are relying on me not to disclose things that they've asked me not to, or they're handing me over things that will tie back to them and damage them. So building trust in that way. So it overlaps in many aspects.
One of the biggest stories you've covered has to be the IVF story from last year. Some of our audience will know the story, but many might not. Can you walk us through this story? How did all of this start in the first place, and how did it blow up to have national ramifications?
Yeah, so that case was filed back in 2021, and I know there's a couple of families involved, and the case involved Mobile Infirmary, a couple families had their embryos stored in the facility within the hospital. A patient allegedly was able to walk around to, go through several doors to access a freezer and ended up dropping embryos while trying to handle them, and ended up destroying several families' embryos. And so that's where the nature of the lawsuit began. And I think that gets lost in a lot of the national narratives, especially when all of the stuff happened with the Supreme Court, is that there were actually injured families that had a claim that they had things that were lost. And so the big question is, that where that lawsuit went is, it was filed in court here in Mobile County. It got tossed, and then where it just began to, the arguments that started to be made in that case by the hospital, by the hospital's attorneys, and no disrespect to the lawyers, they're great lawyers and great guys, and it just the angle of defense work and lawfare just was very interesting, because they ended up crafting this motion to dismiss. It basically argued embryos are human life, but they're not legally children. And that ended up, the judge sided with him on that argument. And it just it basically set up this perfect appeal. And it just went straight up to the Alabama Supreme Court, and you have a conservative Alabama Supreme Court. And you just have to ask yourself, why is the medical community, why is the reproductive practices, why do they want to ask us, conservative Supreme Court that question? And, why are they, it's amazing that they didn't settle.
When the story first came to hit your desk, did you see the writing on the wall immediately that the story could have national ramifications? And if so, why?
There was a question, and it definitely, it was hitting all the right themes at the time. I think it was right around that same time that Roe v. Wade was overturned. And you definitely had to ask the question, this is going to go somewhere. I knew it was going to go somewhere, and either way it went. So yes, in the aspect, I knew it was going to be big. I think the lawyers in the case knew it was going to be big. And it would have been big either way. So I think it would have, however the judge on the local level would have decided that case, I think it would have developed, the same, and had the same way and the same trajectory, and had the same implications. It would have been fought, it would have been appealed, however that went. So.
Yeah, and you made the comment about settlement or not settlement earlier. I mean, there were likely off-ramps which could have been taken by any of the parties to keep this from becoming a national issue. But, I mean, you think there are certain parties who wanted this to be a national issue.
Yeah, that's a possibility too. And and I think when it did hit the national politics, the arguments in the case were, just completely buried. It all became about, when does a embryo become alive or whatever. And most people didn't know that it was the hospital's position that the embryo was a human life. And that was interesting to ask some of, the reproductive life groups that I interviewed. Were you familiar with the case? Did you know that this was how they argued the case? And it was interesting to see their feedback, and a lot of them had no idea. So
yeah, in essence, they basically stipulated to it almost by doing that.
Yeah.
And for those whom haven't followed the story through, I already know the answer to this, but for you to share with our viewers, where do we stand now? I think we know IVF is back up and running in Alabama, but where do we stand in all of this now? To me, it doesn't necessarily seem like the question has been settled definitively.
Yeah, I mean, those cases all ended up settling. Right, well, I'm assuming they settled. No one will tell me either way, but I'm assuming they settled. But they were all quietly dismissed after blowing up that last February, and that was very crazy to see. Joe Biden mention IVF in his State of the Union speech, and and then Donald Trump going to bat, pressuring the Alabama legislature to fast track something through. It became a driving, narrative. So it was wild to see such a local case drive such a massive part of politics at that time. So when the Alabama legislature responded to that pressure from Trump, they put together what appears to be kind of like a Band-Aid. Basically, they've taken and passed a law that removes liability for medical practice or medical practitioners involved in IVF. You have no civil liability. You have immunity. And so that immunity, a lot of questions to it could likely be argued. And I think it's just when will it be challenged? I think the lawmakers I have spoken with, they believe it's a pretty good compromise. And it threads the needle on if somebody practices outside of standard practice, then they don't have that immunity, et cetera. All of that really depends on when it's challenged, if it's challenged. And you still have that big question because the Alabama Supreme Court has said this is a human child, and it leaves open that possibility. Then why is any of this okay? Where can we stop? Where can we end? You had a couple of Alabama lawmakers want to completely do away with IVF. It was a handful, it wasn't many, but I think it's just when it comes up. When it comes up, when someone decides to challenge it, and will that Band-Aid keep things intact?
One of the other big stories you've been working on just broke recently regarding case running in Alabama. I know a lot of people won't know exactly what that means. Obviously, I do, but again, this isn't an interview of me, it's an interview of you. So I know a lot of people won't know exactly what case running means. So can you break it down for our audience? What is case running, and what was your original tip that it might actually be happening here on the Gulf Coast?
The tip I got here is that there are injury patients, who are being rapidly contacted. Some people have reported being called personally, on their cell phones, within hours of a traffic accident, or before or as soon as a traffic accident is published. So how that is happening, that big question is really what kind of led me into wanting to look at who owns this clinic, how is it operating, what kind of services are they pushing out, and really the big question, how in the world are they acquiring these details? So in Alabama, as you know, to even access a police report, you have to have the name, you have to have a date, you have to have a bunch of personal information beforehand to access a traffic report on the state troopers' website when they publish them. That doesn't answer the question for how they're contacting people before those are published, but even then, they know before. They know what they're looking for when they go to the public record. So what the tips I got were these traffic accident victims are being rapidly contacted and solicited, sometimes within hours, and other times either before a police report is filed or of the traffic accident or immediately after. So, it's ambulance chasing is another word for it. And you really are just chasing down injured individuals, and for the hopes of building a claim, an insurance claim, and having that legal work. Actually learned a new vocabulary word this last week, was barratry. So, it's I guess out in Texas, they actually have a barratry statute, and it's essentially just ginning up work for legal services. You're prying people's grievances for legal work.
And the thing about it from a solicitation standpoint is lawyers are essentially not allowed to cold call clients or have somebody on their behalf cold call clients, but yet that is essentially what's happening here, correct?
Yeah, you're and it's interesting. So everything when I started looking into the clinics, it looked like there was a bunch of tiptoeing around. So some of the things I began to hear about from some of the former patients I interviewed, the marketers would call and say, I'm a insurance patient advocate or something along those lines, where
and that's not even a thing, by the way.
No. And it makes them sound like they're the insurance company, and also they're kind of skirting that law against lawyers contacting you, because they're not necessarily the lawyer. They're a telemarketing firm or something to that,
or a healthcare provider. So they're using somebody, for lack of a better way of putting it, as a fence, as a go-between, to still essentially solicit the case. And eventually it will end up in a specific lawyer's hands, or certain lawyers that they've worked with, either, that they're still working with now, or that they may have worked with in the past, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So how deep does this go? How many people, firms, clinics, ancillaries have you found are connected with this?
So this is what really kept happening, is that every time I would find a layer, there was always another layer under it. So it wasn't just that I could find out who the lawyer is, or sorry. First of all, you try and look up who owns this place, and it's not even immediately clear. That was kind of like the first red flag. I was like, why is that a thing? You don't want that to be a thing with the healthcare provider you're going to. And then even when I found out who the owner was, there was another layer behind that. There was more unknowns and more questions. And so from there, it really from identifying the solicitation that was happening, I wanted to figure out, what are they doing for patients? And I ended up calling and just cold calling them, and I didn't really identify myself. I just said, hey, what do you guys do up there? And I was able to get several of the workers from various clinics to actually kind of explain the process. And it's essentially just this passive modality therapy. It's a glorified massage treatment plan, where they send people through this like kind of pipeline of traction beds and eSIMs. There's no, and this was really kind of what was shocking to me, is it's this doc in the box kind of model. There's no, even though this place was called South Alabama Medical Rehab over on Old Shell Road. Everybody knows about it because everybody passes it every day. And every time I talked to a former patient, they were, oh, I thought that was a chiropractor's office, or I thought that was a doctor's office. There is no doctor that works there. There is no
doctor, any nurse practitioner.
There are nurse practitioners, but
do they do anything that you can tell? I mean, is there a chiropractor even on the premises?
No, there's no chiropractor. There's no physical therapist.
So they're not getting therapy in that sense. They're getting essentially put on a bed that has the little and electrostim and hot and cold packs, and they're doing everything but chiropractic adjustments, physical therapy. None of the actual therapy occurs.
Yeah, and it's very low level things that I guess they can technically hand off to a nurse practitioner.
So just because I feel like our audience really deserves to know, who are the specific law firms and clinics which you have found colluding in this, and how did you find they were all connected? Because that web seems to be very difficult to. That was one of the things that impressed me the most about your articles, is that you figured this out. You seemingly figured out everything except for how they're getting people's names.
Yeah, and I might have figured that out too, but we'll see. So we were joking around earlier. The yarn boards where you string everything back and forth. I feel like I should have done that because I get so lost in the details. But if I had built a board, I would basically have the names Dr. Michael Kent Planbeck. He would be the middle one. Planbeck is a chiropractor formerly from Texas, and a lot of people know the name in the legal world, insurance world, because he was notorious for this model that he set up, where he had basically created an enterprise of interworking businesses, of telemarketing firms, chiropractic clinics, and management firms and consulting. So, and they were all coordinating together in the insurance, in this insurance claim in the injured process, trying to basically be the touch point at every turn, to extract any bit of, wealth or value out of a claim that can happen. Well, he actually, Texas tried to prosecute him back in the early 2000s. Kind of a botched process. I think there were some weird things that happened in the grand jury system, but ended up not happening in the criminal side. But Allstate ended up suing him and had a pretty large award of like 3.9 million. And they sued him under the RICO Act, the Racketeering, Influence, and Corruption Organization Act. I didn't realize that was a cause of action for a civil suit, but I thought it was only criminal. So that was the news to me. But so we have this RICO enterprise guy that's been linked, Planbeck. And it was kind of crazy because at first I didn't even know who this was. I had no idea who Planbeck was. It was because I was digging into this, the owner of this local clinic, Chad Lovelace. I randomly came across one business filing where Chad Lovelace uses a different address. It's the only time I've seen him use this address. It's a 1919 Veterans Memorial Boulevard in Kenner, Louisiana, Suite 200. Only time I've seen him use that. And I was kind of getting it to the point where it was like, I'm exhausting all my leads. So I was just trying to search every address that came up. Well, that address that he included on one filing when he closed a business in Florida, ties right back to that Kenner, Louisiana address, which is incidentally the office for Chiropractic Strategies Group, or Michael Planbeck's office. So it was from there. It was just like the whole story just kind of exploded right in front of me. And I was like, there's no way this is connected. This is crazy, because you essentially have this blueprint template that this guy created, 20, 30 years ago being, picked up and laid down and executed again. And he's essentially regrown his whole enterprise. Now, to your point, with the lawyer and the legal aspect, this latest iteration that we have here, he has basically enveloped the entire claim. So he had most of the claim before, and he's not even constrained to chiropractic work anymore. They've dropped the chiropractic work. Now it's just, this doc in the box nurse practitioner thing. Basically they're super flexible. They can
this vague, ambiguous treatment plan that really arguably doesn't do a whole lot for the patient regardless.
And inflates cost rapidly. So they were like, I think one source told me the kind of, the goal was $16,000. And this is, 12-week plan, just outrageous cost for what you're getting. So this current iteration of Planbeck's enterprise has now breached and closed full circle. They had most of the claim before, but now they have all of it, because now there is their own law firm involved. So over the years, they had to use local attorneys, or other law firms that'll.
They'd have to find a law firm either in state or out of state. They'd have to find somebody in state with a license, and they'd have to have that person be the attorney. But of course, that person then is sticking their neck out ethically. So those people eventually get chased off. And now they're using some sort of attorney type thing in-house. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they have basically, deployed one of their own as
as a lawyer and with a law firm.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching, and a special thanks to reporter Scott Johnson for joining us. Scott will be back again next week to finish our interview, so please tune back in. Stay safe, everyone.